The greatest tragedy in life is not the person who has nothing to give, it's the person who keeps giving from a vessel that's already empty. You're bleeding out while handing others bandages. You're starving while cooking meals for the crowd. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the performance and the smiles and the yes when you mean no, your soul is screaming for someone to notice that you're running on absolutely nothing, but nobody sees it. Because you've become so good at hiding the emptiness, you've mastered the art of looking full while feeling hollow. Let me tell you something that's going to shake you. You were never designed to operate from depletion. There is no manufacturer in the world who creates a product and says, run this until it breaks, then keep running it. But that's exactly what you're doing with your soul. You're performing miracles for everyone else while your own spirit is collapsing. You're giving advice you don't follow. You're speaking life into people while your own heart is dying. You're pouring and pouring and pouring, and nobody, not one person has asked you, when was the last time someone poured into you? This is the crisis nobody talks about. We celebrate the burned out servant. We applaud the exhausted giver. We honor the person who sacrifices everything, including their own soul, for the sake of others. And we call it nobility. We call it selflessness. We call it love. But let me tell you what it really is. It's slow spiritual suicide. Because you cannot sustain a life built on giving what you don't have. You cannot manufacture peace for others when you have none yourself. You cannot be a source when you're disconnected from the supply. And here's what makes it worse. You feel guilty for being empty. You feel shame for having nothing left, so you fake it. You pretend the well isn't dry. You smile through the exhaustion. You say yes when everything in you is screaming no. You show up when you should be shut down. You perform when you should be resting. And the whole time you're wondering why you feel so disconnected, so numb, so lost in a life that looks productive but feels completely hollow. The truth is, you've been living in confusion and calling it purpose. You've been moving without direction and calling it faith. You've been busy without being fruitful. You've been active without being alive. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that you're a human being, not a vending machine. You're not here to dispense wisdom, energy, love, and support to everyone who walks by while your own tank sits on empty. You're not here to be used up and thrown away. But that's what rejection does to you. It convinces you that your value is in your output. That if you stop producing, you stop mattering. That if you stop performing, you will be abandoned. So you keep going. You keep giving. You keep showing up. Even when your soul is begging you to stop. Even when your body is shutting down. Even when your mind is screaming that something is terribly wrong. You keep pouring from an empty cup because you're terrified of what will happen if people see that you have nothing left. Let me tell you what's really happening. You're seeking approval through exhaustion. You're trying to earn love through depletion. You're attempting to prove your worth by destroying yourself. And it will never work, because the people who only value you for what you give them will never love you for who you are. They don't want you full. They want you functional. They don't want you healed. They want you helpful. They don't care about your soul. They care about your service. And this is where the emptiness comes from. Not from a lack of activity, but from a lack of alignment. You're doing good things for the wrong reasons. You're in the right rooms with the wrong motives. You're saying the right words with an exhausted heart. You're building a life that looks impressive on the outside while crumbling on the inside, and nobody knows, nobody sees, because you've perfected the performance. You've wasted so much time trying to fill the emptiness with more doing, more serving, more giving, more movement. But emptiness isn't solved by activity, it's solved by refilling, by stopping, by turning inward, by finally admitting that you cannot keep going like this, that something has to change, that you have to change. Your identity has been fractured by the opinions of people who don't even know you. You've become what they needed instead of who you were created to be. You've shrunk yourself to fit their expectations. You've silenced your own needs to accommodate theirs. You've buried your own dreams to build theirs. And now you're standing in a life you barely recognize, wondering why you feel so lost, so empty, so fundamentally disconnected from yourself. The fear of being alone has driven you into rooms where you don't belong. The terror of rejection has kept you in relationships that drain you. The desperation for approval has made you a slave to people who will never be satisfied. And all of it, every bit of it, has led you to this moment, this breaking point, this place where you finally have to decide whether you're going to keep dying slowly or start living intentionally. You're emotionally wounded and spiritually bankrupt, but you're still showing up to serve. You're broken, but still trying to fix everyone else. You're lost, but still trying to give directions, and it's destroying you. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, silently, one yes at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one moment of self-abandonment at a time. Here's what you need to understand. Every manufacturer knows the limits of what they've created. The person who built the car knows how much fuel it needs. The engineer who designed the machine knows how much pressure it can handle. And your creator knows exactly what you need to function at full capacity. But somewhere along the way, you started operating outside of your design. You started running on fumes and calling it faith. You started pushing beyond your limits and calling it strength. You started ignoring every warning sign your soul was giving you and calling it perseverance. Think about a well in the center of a village. For generations, people come to draw water. They take and take and take, and the well gives. Day after day, it provides. But if nobody ever allows the underground springs to replenish it, if nobody ever lets the rains refill what's being extracted, eventually that well runs dry. And when it does, the people don't blame themselves for over-extraction. They blame the well for being empty. They abandon it. They call it useless. They move on to the next source. That's exactly what's happening to you. People have been drawing from you without ever considering that you need replenishment. And now that you're dry, they're confused why you have nothing left to give. But here's the part that breaks my heart. You've been trained to feel guilty about being empty. You've been conditioned to believe that needing to refill is selfish. That taking time for your own soul is self-centered. That prioritizing your own healing is somehow wrong. So instead of stopping to replenish, you try to manufacture water from dust. You try to give what you don't have. You try to pour from a vessel that's bone dry, and it's killing you. Let me tell you about the seed. When a seed falls into the ground, it doesn't immediately start producing. It sits in darkness. It absorbs moisture. It breaks open. It develops roots you cannot see. It takes time in the hidden place doing internal work that nobody applauds. And during that season, if you dug it up and demanded fruit, you destroy the very process that leads to harvest. The seed must absorb before it can produce. It must be filled before it can multiply. It must be rooted before it can rise. But you've been trying to produce fruit without ever taking time to develop roots. You've been trying to give shade without ever growing strong. You've been trying to feed others without ever being nourished yourself. Even a lion, the king of the jungle, knows when to stop hunting. When a lion is wounded, it retreats. It finds a quiet place. It rests. It heals. It doesn't keep chasing prey while bleeding. It doesn't keep fighting while injured. It has the wisdom to recognize that a wounded lion trying to hunt becomes prey. And you are wounded, you are bleeding, you are injured. But you're still out there trying to fight battles, solve problems, carry burdens, and rescue people. And the predators of exhaustion, burnout, depression, and resentment are circling you because they can smell the blood. There's a story about a craftsman who was known throughout the land for sharpening blades. Kings and warriors traveled great distances to have him sharpen their swords. Day and night, people came. Day and night, he worked. He sharpened their weapons until they could cut through anything. But he never sharpened his own tools. His own blade grew duller and duller. One day, a young apprentice asked him, "Master, how can you sharpen the swords of kings when your own blade cannot cut paper?" The craftsman looked at his dull, worn tool and realized he had spent so much time serving others that he had neglected the very instrument he needed to do the work. He had poured all his skill into others while allowing himself to become useless. That's you. You've been so busy sharpening everyone else, building everyone else, healing everyone else, that you've allowed your own edge to dull. You've allowed your own strength to fade. You've allowed your own soul to deteriorate. And now you're wondering why you feel so ineffective, so powerless, so incapable of cutting through your own challenges. The potter understands something profound. You cannot fire a pot that hasn't been properly prepared. If you take clay that's still wet, still soft, still unprepared, and you put it in the fire, it doesn't become stronger. It cracks, it breaks, it's destroyed. The clay must first be shaped, then dried, then slowly brought to temperature. Only then can it withstand the heat that transforms it into something unbreakable. But you've been thrown into fires you weren't prepared for. You've been subjected to pressure your soul wasn't ready to handle, and instead of becoming stronger, you're cracking. The fractures are showing. And still, people expect you to hold water. Before I continue, answer one question honestly. When was the last time you filled your own cup without guilt? When was the last time you said no to someone else so you could say yes to yourself? When was the last time you chose your own healing over someone else's comfort? When was the last time you stopped performing and started being? If you can't remember, then you've been living from depletion so long, you've forgotten what fullness feels like. If you're still listening, something inside you is waking up. Something in your soul recognizes the truth of what I'm saying. And that recognition is the beginning of your restoration. You need to understand something that's going to change everything. The sacred pause is not a setback. Isolation is not punishment. The season where you have to pull back, where you have to disappoint people, where you have to say no to opportunities that once excited you, that's not you falling behind. That's you being prepared. That's you being repositioned. That's you being refilled. But we live in a culture that worships constant motion. We've been taught that stopping means quitting, that slowing down means giving up, that taking time for yourself means you're weak, and so we run ourselves into the ground trying to prove we're strong. But strength isn't found in constant output. Strength is built in strategic withdrawal. The forest doesn't grow during the day when everyone's watching. It grows at night in the silence. The muscle doesn't develop during the workout. It develops during the rest, when the fibers repair themselves stronger than before. Your soul doesn't expand in the noise of everyone else's expectations. It expands in the quiet when you finally give yourself permission to just be. Here's what nobody tells you. Good is often the enemy of right. You can be doing good things, helpful things, productive things, and still be completely out of alignment with what's right for your soul. You can be in good rooms with good people, doing good work, and still feel absolutely empty because it's not your work, it's not your season, it's not your assignment. You've been saying yes to good opportunities while saying no to the right ones. You've been accepting good enough while rejecting what's actually yours. And the tragedy is that good things done from an empty soul don't produce life, they produce resentment. Let me tell you something about direction versus movement. Movement is easy. You can move in circles and call it progress. You can stay busy and call it productive. You can fill your calendar and call it purposeful. But direction requires something movement doesn't. It requires stillness. It requires clarity. It requires you to stop long enough to figure out where you're actually going. You've been moving so fast, so constantly, that you've never stopped to ask if you're moving in the right direction. And now you're exhausted from going nowhere. The question you need to ask isn't, am I doing enough? The question is, am I filling my own cup? Because here's the reality. You cannot heal others with wounds you haven't addressed. You think you can, you've been trying to. You've been offering bandages while bleeding. You've been prescribing medicine you won't take. You've been giving advice you don't follow. And maybe it helps them for a moment. Maybe your broken wisdom still has some value, but it's costing you everything. Every time you minister from your wounds instead of your healing, you reopen the very things that need to close. You cannot guide others through darkness you haven't walked through yourself. not authentically. You can fake it. You can memorize the directions. You can repeat what you've heard. But there's a difference between showing someone the way and having actually walked the path. There's a difference between knowing about healing and being healed. There's a difference between talking about wholeness and actually being whole. And people can feel the difference even if they can't name it. You cannot pour wisdom from an empty vessel. And this is where you've been deceiving yourself. You think because you have knowledge, you have wisdom. You think because you have information, you have insight. But wisdom isn't just what you know. It's what you've processed. It's what you've lived through. It's what you've applied to your own soul first. You've been trying to give people wisdom you haven't internalized. Truth you haven't embodied. Freedom you haven't experienced. And it's left you feeling like a fraud. What your soul actually needs isn't more activity. It's alignment. It's not another sermon. It's silence. It's not another person to save. It's solitude with yourself. But you're terrified of silence because silence reveals what you've been running from. You're afraid of solitude because being alone with yourself means facing the emptiness you've been avoiding. You've been using busyness as a drug to numb the pain of disconnection. You've been using service as an escape from dealing with your own soul. Think about the ancient well that collapsed. For generations, it served a village. Every day, people came with their buckets. Every day, the well provided. But over time, the structure began to weaken. Small cracks formed in the walls. The foundation started to shift. But nobody noticed because the water kept flowing. Until one day, without warning, the entire well caved in. Not because it was never strong, but because the constant extraction without maintenance eventually led to complete collapse. And the village stood around the ruins wondering why it happened so suddenly, when the truth is it had been happening slowly for years. That's where you are. You're one more withdrawal away from collapse. You're one more yes away from breaking. You're one more sacrifice away from complete depletion. And you feel it. You know it. But you're still afraid to stop, because stopping means people will see that you're not okay. Stopping means disappointing those who depend on you. Stopping means admitting that you can't keep going like this. But let me tell you what happens when you finally stop. When you finally say enough. When you finally choose yourself, you fill in silence. You don't fill by talking about your emptiness to everyone who will listen. You don't fill by seeking validation for your struggle. You fill by actually stopping, by being still, by doing the internal work that nobody sees and nobody applauds. You restore in solitude. Not isolation that punishes you. Solitude that protects you. That gives you space to hear your own thoughts. That allows you to reconnect with who you are beneath all the roles you've been playing. You become whole in the hidden place. Not on the stage. Not in the spotlight. Not where everyone can see your transformation. But in the secret place where you finally stop performing and start healing. This is the momentum you've been missing. You grow in silence. You heal in silence. You rise in silence. Everything that matters happens in the place nobody sees. The roots grow underground. The baby develops in the womb. The seed breaks open in the dark. Your greatest transformation will not happen in public. It will happen in private. And when you emerge, people will call it sudden. They'll call it overnight. They'll wonder how you changed so dramatically. But you know the truth. You know about the nights you spent alone doing the work. You know about the no's you had to say. You know about the pain you had to process. You know about the emptiness you had to face. The hardest thing you'll ever do is disappoint people temporarily to save yourself permanently. They won't understand. They'll call you selfish. They'll say you've changed. They'll accuse you of abandoning them, and you'll have to let them. Because their opinion of your healing is not more important than your survival. Their comfort is not more valuable than your soul. Their expectation is not worth your destruction. You have to choose you even when it costs you them. Here's what changes everything. When you finally stop pouring from emptiness and start pouring from overflow, the entire dynamic shifts. You're no longer giving out of obligation. You're no longer serving out of guilt. You're no longer showing up because you're afraid of what people will think if you don't. You're giving because you're full. You're serving because you want to, not because you have to. You're pouring out of abundance, not out of desperation. And people feel the difference. What you give from overflow carries life. What you give from depletion carries death. Same action, different source, completely different result. This is the identity shift that most people never make. They spend their entire lives thinking they're supposed to be a depleted servant, thinking that exhaustion is a badge of honor, thinking that running on empty somehow proves their dedication. But you were never meant to be depleted. You were designed to be replenished. You weren't created to be a resource that gets used up and discarded. You were created to be a source that stays connected to an eternal supply. And when you're connected, when you're filled, when you are whole, you don't run dry. You overflow. And overflow is effortless. Overflow doesn't drain you. Overflow doesn't exhaust you. Overflow doesn't leave you empty because you're not giving from what you have. You're giving from what flows through you. But to get to overflow, you have to do something most people refuse to do. You have to become whole. Not perfect, not flawless, not without scars, but whole, integrated, healed in the places that matter, at peace with your story, connected to your purpose, rooted in your identity. And wholeness doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen because you're busy. It doesn't happen because you're serving everyone else. Wholeness happens when you finally turn inward and do the work that terrifies you. When you finally face the wounds you've been ignoring. When you finally deal with the pain you've been medicating with, productivity. Let me paint you a picture of what's awakening right now. All over the world, there are people just like you who are waking up. They're waking up to the reality that they've been living someone else's life. They've been chasing someone else's dream. They've been fulfilling someone else's expectations. And something inside them is saying enough. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity, with conviction, with a quiet strength that says, I cannot keep doing this. I will not keep dying for people who don't even notice I'm fading. I will not keep sacrificing my soul for applause that means nothing. These are the people who are finally choosing themselves, not in a selfish way, not in an arrogant way, but in a survival way, in a sacred way, in a this is the only way I can actually live way. And when they make that choice, when they finally stop performing and start being, something shifts in the atmosphere around them. The people who were using them get uncomfortable. The people who were draining them get upset. The people who benefited from their depletion start accusing them of changing, and they have changed. They've gone from empty to full, from broken to whole, from lost to found. And that transformation threatens everyone who preferred them powerless. But here's what you need to understand. The authority that comes from a full soul is undeniable. When you speak from overflow instead of emptiness, your words carry weight. When you move from wholeness instead of woundedness, your presence commands respect. When you operate from abundance instead of scarcity, you attract a completely different level of opportunity. Not because you're trying to prove anything, not because you're performing, but because authenticity is magnetic, wholeness is powerful. And people who are genuinely full don't have to convince anyone of anything. Their life speaks. This is your calling. Not to be a martyr, not to be a victim, not to be someone who sacrifices everything and calls it noble. Your calling is to be whole so you can help others become whole. Your calling is to be filled so you can pour out of abundance. Your calling is to be healed so you can actually heal and not just bandage. But you cannot walk in that calling from where you are right now. You cannot step into that level of impact while running on empty. You cannot fulfill that purpose while your own soul is gasping for air. So here's what has to happen. You have to make a decision that everyone won't understand. You have to enter a season that looks like nothing to people who only value productivity. You have to prioritize your soul over their opinions. You have to choose your healing over their comfort. You have to value your restoration more than their applause. And it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you relationships with people who only wanted you broken. It's going to cost you opportunities that would have kept you empty. It's going to cost you the version of yourself that everyone got comfortable with. But what you gain is worth infinitely more than what you lose. What you gain is yourself. Your real self. Not the persona you created to survive. Not the mask you wore to belong. Not the version of you that everyone else needed, but the actual you. The you that has dreams you stop talking about. The you that has gifts you've been suppressing. The you that has a voice you've been silencing. The you that has a destiny you've been delaying because you were too busy fulfilling everyone else's agenda. Imagine living from that place. Imagine waking up and not immediately feeling the weight of everyone's expectations. Imagine moving through your day connected to your purpose instead of chasing their approval. Imagine saying no without guilt. Imagine saying yes without obligation. Imagine giving because you're full, not because you're afraid. Imagine loving from overflow instead of from desperation. Imagine creating from inspiration instead of from pressure. That's not a fantasy. That's what's available to you on the other side of this decision. But you have to walk through the fire first. You have to face the guilt of disappointing people. You have to endure the accusations of being selfish. You have to survive the loneliness of choosing yourself when everyone else wanted you to choose them. You have to sit in the discomfort of not being needed the way you used to be. You have to grieve the version of yourself that died so the real you could live. And it's painful, it's uncomfortable, it's terrifying, but it's necessary. Because on the other side of that death is resurrection. On the other side of that emptiness is overflow. On the other side of that breaking is building. And when you emerge, and you will emerge, you won't be the same person. You'll be fuller, stronger, clearer, more aligned, more powerful, more authentic, more you. And from that place, from that fullness, from that overflow, you'll impact people in ways you never could when you were empty. You'll speak words that actually change lives instead of just sounding good. You'll create things that actually last instead of just looking impressive. You'll build relationships that actually fulfill instead of just filling time. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning. This is not you giving up. This is you finally waking up. This is not you being selfish. This is you being wise enough to recognize that you cannot pour from an empty soul. And the best thing you can do for everyone you love is become whole. Fill your cup. Heal your wounds. Find your center. Reconnect with your source. And then, and only then, pour. Not from obligation, from overflow. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you want more messages that grow your soul, subscribe, because your journey has just begun. You're standing at a crossroads right now. One path leads back to the exhaustion you've known, back to the performance, back to the emptiness disguised as service, back to pouring from a vessel that has nothing left. That path is familiar. It's comfortable in its pain. You know how to survive there. But survival is not living. And somewhere deep in your soul, you know you weren't created to just survive. The other path is unknown. It's the path where you finally choose yourself, where you fill your own cup first, where you heal before you help, where you become whole before you pour out. That path is terrifying because it requires you to disappoint people, to set boundaries, to say no, to step back, to be misunderstood, to be called selfish by people who benefited from your depletion. But that path leads to life, real life, abundant life. The kind of life where you don't wake up exhausted before the day even begins. Here's the truth you need to hear. You are worth the refilling. You are worth the healing. You are worth the time it takes to become whole. Your soul matters, not because of what you produce, not because of who you serve, not because of what you accomplish, but because you exist, because you were created with value that has nothing to do with your output. And until you believe that, until you truly know that, you'll keep running yourself into the ground trying to earn worth you already have. So stop right now. Stop performing. Stop proving. Stop pouring from empty. Choose yourself. Fill your soul. Heal your wounds. Reconnect with who you really are. And when you're full, when you're whole, when you're overflowing, then pour. Not because you have to, because you want to, because you can. Because you're finally living from the place you were always meant to live from. Abundance, wholeness, overflow. Your soul is waiting. Fill it.